Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Hope everybody's still doing well. This is part 2 of my video lecture series on well-being. Part 2 of my video lecture series on well-being. So I concluded part 1 talking about Heathwood's response to the pointless desires and murderous desires objections. Now, his responses there might seem to be counterintuitive, but keep in mind the intuition that he's trying to work with, the foundation of his theory that something could be good for someone only if one desires it. Sometimes it's put this way: something's good for someone only if someone cares about it. Once you have that view, once you have that belief as a foundational part of your theory of well-being, then his response might seem more intuitive. So let's just set those objections aside and focus on a different kind of objection. The objection is the objection of poisonous desires. What's that objection look like? Well, it looks like this. Suppose we imagine Jones, and Jones wants to drink the poison. So Jones has a desire to drink the poison. It'd be then good for Jones to drink the poison, but it seems like it'd be bad for him to do so, because if he does so, guess what? He's going to be sick and he's going to die. So it looks like the desire satisfaction theory gets the wrong result. Okay, so in this case, having your desire satisfied leads to your sickness and your ultimate death. Okay, how is Heathwood going to respond to this one? Because this seems on the face of it to be a powerful objection. Well, Heathwood wants to say that that in this case, we could imagine it being true that the person who has a desire to drink the poison also has a desire not to be made sick and also has a desire not to die. And so in this case, like many cases that we're in, we have to consider the complex arrangement of desires that we have. It's not going to be true, at least typically, that that a person has a single desire, and that once that desire is satisfied, the person's well-being is improved. That may be true some of the time, but in this case it isn't, because the person who desires to drink the poison certainly doesn't desire to be made severely ill, and certainly doesn't desire to be killed by him or herself. And so Heathwood then wants to say, insofar as his desire to not be killed by himself or herself, and insofar as his desire not to be made sick, or greater than his desire to drink the poison, then in this circumstance it turns out not to be good for him to drink the poison, because these other desires, and they're being thwarted by drinking the poison, would outweigh the desire to drink the poison. And so in this case, it turns out that more of his desires are frustrated, and so it'd be true then to say that it is bad for him to drink the poison. So he doesn't have to bite the bullet and say that it's good to drink the poison. Okay, so I think we get the general idea here. We have to consider the complex arrangement of our desires and the strength of those desires to determine whether or not having a particular desire satisfied is good or bad for us. Now, of course, Heathwood doesn't consider this, but we can certainly imagine a case where someone only has that desire for whatever reason. The psychological state is such that he only has a desire to drink the poison, isn't desiring anything about being kept alive or not being made sick. And in that case, then it looks like it's going to be good for him to have his desire satisfied drinking the poison. Now, this might be the kind of rare case that Heathwood kind of goes, okay, in that case, I have to just go ahead and bite the bullet and say that it's good for him to drink the poison. But Heathwood can say that's the rare case, so I don't have any problem with saying that in that case. But in most normal cases, it's going to be the case that a person who has a desire to drink poison also has a desire not to get sick, and also has a desire not to be killed. Okay, so Heathwood tries to deflect the problem of poisonous desires. And maybe he's successful, maybe he's not. I don't want to get into that. I just wanted to raise it. I'll let you, the audience, decide on whether or not Heathwood is correct with respect to his response to the poisonous desires objection. Okay, what about a different kind of objection? Okay, and this is an objection that he considers and then isn't quite sure what to do with. And the objection really involves the following. Suppose we imagine Mary, and I'm going to use different names than he does in his piece. Suppose we imagine Mary has an uncle, and Mary desires that her uncle has a happy future. Well, suppose that Mary's uncle moves away from Mary, and Mary never hears from him again. And imagine during this time period that Mary's uncle is happy. So Mary has a desire that her uncle be made happy, but Mary has no awareness of her uncle's happiness. Well, it looks like, according to desire satisfaction theory, as if this makes Mary's life go better for her, makes her life go well for her, that her uncle's desires, that her uncle is happy. So the nature of the objection here, to be clear, is just supposed to be that it doesn't seem as if her uncle's happiness has any connection with her consciousness sufficiently to affect her well-being one way or the other. So it looks like desire satisfactionism gets the wrong result here. Desire satisfactionism, simply put, has it that that something's good for you in a fundamental sense, or intrinsically speaking, only if your desire is satisfied. Well, the desire that's satisfied here is one that she has no cognitive awareness of. So how on earth can it possibly be good for her? So that's the nature of the objection. Now Heathwood, he wants to try to respond to this in part in some of his works, and one of his responses to say that maybe we need to just say that it's only those desires that you're aware of. Again, I don't want to get too into a back and forth on this topic. The point is, the point I really want to make is that this is an objection, and that Heathwood has at least an initial response to it. Maybe he's going to qualify by saying that only those desires that you're aware of or sufficiently aware of are going to count as those that can contribute to your well-being once they're satisfied, or thwarted, as the case may be. But again, what does it mean to be sufficiently aware of? We're getting at all kinds of issues here. So that's the problem that desire satisfaction theory is going to have to deal with. Okay, so that's our example of a monistic subjectivist theory of well-being, desire satisfaction theory by Chris Heathwood. Now, there's another kind of theory that I mentioned in part one of my video lecture series on this topic, and it was objectivism and its pluralism. The relevant form was a kind of pluralism where there's many different kinds, or at least more than one kind of thing that's intrinsically good for us, and some of those things are good for us independent of the kinds of things that we desire, or the kinds of experiences that we can have, or sometimes independent of our psychological or physiological makeup. Okay, the theory I want to talk about here is one that's developed by a philosopher named Jean Kazez. Jean Kazez argues that many different kinds of things can contribute to a person's well-being, and in fact, many different kinds of things are intrinsically good for the person who has them. So she argues that happiness is something that's intrinsically good for us, and here she gives examples. So when you read Kazez, some of her work, she likes to give examples to illustrate her points, and here she mentions a novelist named William Styron, and for those of you who know Styron, he wrote Sophie's Choice. Well, Styron, in other works, wrote autobiographically about his deep depression and how he struggled with suicide and how his life was just terrible for him. And then after a while, he ended up experiencing happiness, and this really contributed greatly to his overall well-being. And what Kazez wants to say is that then that this gives us reason to think, this kind of case gives us reason to think that that happiness is something that's intrinsically good, because that's the thing that was added to his life. That was the one difference in his states of mind, um, um, and it's the one thing then that contributed to his well-being being improved. So what's important to note is that she's going to say that happiness is intrinsically good, but she's not going to say that all experiences of happiness are thereby equal. Some states of happiness are better than others, so it's better to be made happy by things that you are directly affected by or related to or you're really connected to, as opposed to taking, say, pills that magic pills that make you happy, for example. So really doing things and having real experiences are the things that are things that lead to an enhanced level of happiness and that are intrinsically good for us. Okay, so happiness is something that's intrinsically good for us by Kazez's standards, but also autonomy. Here she gives examples of a woman named Caroline who's discussed in David Shipler's work, The Working Poor, The Invisible America. And Caroline, she has a job at Walmart. She has no teeth, and so she has a hard time getting jobs. And when she gets hired, she tends to get night shifts at places so that she can work outside of the public viewing. But she also has a daughter that's suffering and needs to be taken care of in the evening. She has a disabled daughter, so she has a hard time really keeping work and finding work in the first place. So she really lacks a lot of control over her life based on this, and so her lack of autonomy seems to make her life go worse for her. So it stands to reason that if she had more autonomy, her life would go better for her. And this would be the one thing that you would add to this life would make it go better. So this gives us reason to think that autonomy is intrinsically good for us. Moreover, having a unified self is intrinsically good for us. So a man named Jonathan Cott, an author, wrote about the fact that he had electroconvulsive therapy to cure his depression that ended up removing a lot of his memories. But what happened when after he did this was that he experienced a lot of psychological disconnect between his present self and his past self, and that disunity led to a kind of disunified self. And so he longed for the days, this is Jonathan Cott, he longed for the days when he had that kind of unity again. And even though he was struggling with severe depression, he thought that he really did something in violation of his well-being in an intrinsic, fundamental way by creating such a disconnect between his past selves and his future self, which is a present self. Okay, so the unified self is significant to well-being. In fact, it's intrinsic to well-being, says someone like Kazez. But also morality seems to be significant on Kazez's standards. So the idea here is that, or the example that she gives us is of Raskolnikov, who's a character in Dostoevsky's work Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov commits this heinous murder. I won't ruin it for you, no spoiler alert here. But Raskolnikov, he ends up later on taking responsibility for the crime that he commits. And what Kazez wants to say is that this is one difference in his life that makes his life go better for him. So therefore, we have reason to think that it's something that is intrinsically good for him. It's fundamentally good for him. His life goes better for him as soon as he starts taking responsibility, moral responsibility for his behavior. And it's not because he's made more happy. It's because he does the morally right thing. But also, Kazez wants to say that progress is something that contributes intrinsically to our well-being. So the example that we could give here would be Frederick Douglass. That's the example that Kazez gives. Frederick Douglass went from a slave, a deplorable state, to being a great orator, an abolitionist leader, etc., etc. And it's the progress of his life, it's the fact that the arc of his life was one of progress that makes his life go intrinsically good for him. So here we have an objective list of things that are good for us, says Kazez. They're intrinsically good for us, and they make our lives go better. And none of the goods here can be reducible to any of the other goods. Okay, so that's our objective list theory. That's our pluralistic theory. And that's all I have to say about well-being. Thanks for watching, everybody. More to come soon.